The Chicago night was alive, a symphony of honking cabs, distant sirens, and the low hum of a city that never slept. Under the flickering glow of a street lamp on 47th Street, James Carter stood frozen, his heart pounding like a drum in his chest. Across from him, Maya Thompson's eyes locked onto his, dark and luminous, holding a challenge and a promise. Her lips, soft and warm, pressed against his, and for the first time in years, the world around him melted away. No penthouse, no private jet, no billion-dollar empire could compare to this single, electrifying moment. Her hands gripped the lapels of his wool coat, pulling him closer, and he could feel the heat of her breath mingling with his. The kiss was hungry, unguarded, like they'd both been starving for something real and had finally found it. His fingers brushed the curve of her waist, tracing the fabric of her simple burgundy dress, and he felt her shiver under his touch. When they finally pulled apart, her smile was a spark in the dark, and James knew without a doubt that his life had just changed forever. "Wow," he managed, his voice rough, like he'd just run a marathon. That was something." Maya laughed, a sound so warm it could have melted the November chill. "You're not so bad yourself, Mr. Fancy Coat." She tilted her head, her natural curls bouncing slightly, catching the light. "But don't get too comfortable. That was just a start." He grinned, feeling lighter than he had in years. "A start, huh? I'm in." As they stood there, the city buzzing around them, James's mind rewound to how he'd ended up here, kissing a woman who'd turned his world upside down in a single evening. It hadn't been long, barely a week, but it felt like a lifetime. To understand this moment, he had to go back to the beginning, to a night that started like any other in his carefully curated life. James Carter, 42, was a name that carried weight in Chicago. CEO of Carter Tech, a software giant that powered half the city's startups, he was a fixture on Forbes lists and the guest lists of every gala from Lincoln Park to the Gold Coast. His penthouse in the Loop, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan, was the kind of place people dreamed of. But every night, when the city lights glittered below, the silence of that sprawling apartment pressed against him like a weight. The leather couches, the imported marble counters, the abstract art he'd bought because someone told him it was important. None of it filled the emptiness. He'd had everything, or so the world thought. A private jet on standby, a wardrobe of tailored suits, a Rolodex of contacts who'd kill for a meeting. But at 42, James was starting to see the cracks. His parents, wealthy and distant, had raised him to chase success, not connection. His one serious relationship back in his 30s had crashed and burned when his fiancée, a socialite named Vanessa, admitted she loved his status more than him. Since then, he'd built walls, thick, polished ones, and no one had come close to breaking through, until Maya. It started at a community education summit in Bronzeville, a neighborhood he'd rarely visited despite living in Chicago his whole life. His assistant Karen had insisted he attend. "Good for PR," she'd said, shoving the invite into his calendar. James had nodded, barely listening. These events were all the same. Forced smiles, small talk, and checks written to ease his conscience. He'd planned to make an appearance, shake a few hands, and slip out early. But then, he saw her. Maya Thompson stood at the front of a crowded community center, her voice ringing with a passion that silenced the room. She was 35, with skin the color of rich cocoa and curls that framed her face like a crown. Her dress, a vibrant mix of red and gold patterns, seemed to carry a story of its own, and she moved with a confidence that didn't beg for approval. It demanded it. She was speaking about education, about giving kids in underserved neighborhoods a shot at a future. Her words weren't polished or rehearsed. They were raw, urgent, like she was fighting for every child in that room. James, leaning against the back wall, felt something stir inside him. It wasn't just her beauty, though she was stunning, with eyes that seemed to see right through you. It was the way she owned the space, the way she made everyone feel seen. He'd spent his life surrounded by people chasing clout or cash, but Maya was different. She was real. When the talk ended, he lingered, something pulling him toward her. He found her by a table of refreshments, studying a flyer with the same intensity she'd brought to her speech. He straightened his tie, summoning the charm that had closed billion-dollar deals. "Impressive talk," he said, flashing a smile. "You've got a gift for this." She glanced up, her eyes sharp, sizing him up in a heartbeat. "Thanks," she said, her tone polite but guarded. "But I'm not here for compliments. I'm here for the kids." He blinked, caught off guard. Most people melted under his attention, but Maya wasn't most people. "Fair enough," he said, recovering. "I'm James, by the way. James Carter." He waited for the usual flicker of recognition. His name wasn't exactly low profile, but she just nodded. "Maya Thompson," she said, extending a hand. Her grip was firm, her smile warm but not fawning. "Nice to meet you, James." They talked, and it wasn't what he expected. She didn't ask about his company or his watch or drop names to impress him. Instead, she challenged him, asking what he thought about the city's failing schools, pushing back when he gave a vague answer. "Come on, James," she said, a playful edge to her voice. "You're smarter than that. What's the real problem here?" He was hooked. For the first time in years, someone was talking to him. Not the billionaire, not the magazine cover, just him. When he offered to take her to dinner at Alinea, one of Chicago's priciest spots, she laughed outright. "Nah, that's not my vibe," she said, her eyes twinkling. "If you want to hang, meet me at Soul Shack on 47th. Friday 7 sharp. Bring an appetite." He'd laughed too, surprised by how much he liked her directness. Soul Shack it is. Friday came, and James found himself nervous, actually nervous, for the first time since his first boardroom pitch. Soul Shack was a small, bustling spot in the heart of Bronzeville. Its windows steamed up from the heat of the kitchen. The air smelled of fried chicken, cornbread, and something smoky and sweet. Locals filled the tables, their laughter mixing with the clink of glasses and the sizzle of the grill. James, in his tailored coat and loafers, felt like he'd stepped into another world. Maya was already there, waving him over to a corner booth. She wore a burgundy dress that hugged her curves, simple but striking, and her smile lit up the room. "You made it," she said, sliding a menu toward him. "I was half expecting you to bail." "Not a chance," he said, settling in. "I'm tougher than I look." She raised an eyebrow, teasing. "We'll see about that." The meal was a revelation. They shared a platter of fried chicken, collard greens, and macaroni so cheesy it should have been illegal. Maya laughed as he fumbled with a piece of cornbread, crumbs scattering across the table. "You're hopeless," she said. But her eyes were warm, and when she reached over to brush a crumb from his chin, her touch sent a jolt through him. They talked for hours, about her work, her dreams for her students, her childhood in the South Side. She told him about her mom, a single parent who'd worked 2 jobs to keep the lights on, and her sister Lila, who'd always had her back. James found himself opening up too, something he rarely did. He told her about growing up with parents who cared more about their stock portfolio than their son, about building Carter Tech to prove he was more than their shadow. "You ever get tired of it?" she asked, leaning forward, her fork paused midair. "All the money, the power, the everything?" He hesitated, the question cutting deeper than he expected. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Most times, I don't know what else to be." Her gaze softened, and for a moment, he felt exposed, like she could see the parts of him he'd spent years hiding. "You're more than your bank account, James," she said quietly. "You just gotta figure out what that means." The words stayed with him, echoing in his mind as they left the restaurant. The night was cool, the streets alive with music spilling from nearby bars. They walked, their shoulders brushing, and when they stopped under that street lamp, the air between them crackled with something undeniable. "Maya," he started, his voice low. "I don't know what this is, but She didn't let him finish. She stepped closer, her hand resting on his chest, and kissed him. It wasn't tentative or shy. It was bold, fierce, like she was claiming something she'd been waiting for. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her close, and the world disappeared. Her lips tasted faintly of sweet tea, her curls tickled his cheek, and every nerve in his body was alive. When they broke apart, her eyes were bright, her breath uneven. "Don't make this complicated, James," she said, but her smile was soft, almost vulnerable. "Just be here, with me." "I'm here," he said, meaning it more than he'd meant anything in years. Back in his penthouse that night, James couldn't sleep. Maya's face danced in his mind. Her laugh, her voice, the way she'd looked at him like he was enough. He stood at his window, the city sprawling below, and felt something shift inside him. For the first time in forever, he wasn't thinking about deals or deadlines. He was thinking about her. He knew it wouldn't be easy. Their worlds were miles apart. His, all glass towers and private clubs. Hers, community centers and soul food joints. He'd seen the way people looked at them at Soul Shack, the raised eyebrows, the whispers. And he wasn't naive. Chicago might be a melting pot, but it wasn't blind to race or class. Maya was a black woman who'd fought for every inch of her place in the world. He was a white guy who'd never had to. Could he really fit into her life? Could she ever feel at home in his? But as he replayed that kiss, the warmth of her against him, he knew one thing for sure. He had to try. Maya Thompson wasn't just a spark, she was a fire, and he was ready to burn. Hey, if that moment under the street lamp gave you chills, like it did me, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below. Have you ever had a kiss that turned your world upside down? Share it with me, and let's keep this story rolling together. The Soul Shack had been a revelation, but it was just the beginning. James Carter, a man who'd built an empire on control and calculation, was tumbling headfirst into something he couldn't predict. Maya Thompson was like a song he couldn't stop humming, her laughter echoing in his mind long after they'd said goodnight under that street lamp. Over the next few weeks, their worlds started to collide, and James found himself chasing a feeling he hadn't known he'd been missing. Their first real date, outside the impromptu dinner at Soul Shack, happened on a crisp Chicago morning at a tiny coffee shop in Hyde Park. The place was a hole in the wall, with mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu that boasted the best damn latte in the city. Maya was already there when James arrived, her curls tucked under a knit beanie, a steaming mug in her hands. She looked up from her book, a worn copy of Beloved, and grinned. "You're late?" she teased, kicking out the chair across from her. "I was about to give your seat to the next guy in line." James chuckled, sliding into the chair. "Good luck finding someone who can keep up with you." "Oh, I don't know," she said, her eyes sparkling. "Plenty of guys out there with better coffee game than you." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Challenge accepted. Next time I'm picking the spot." The banter came easy, like they'd known each other for years instead of days. They talked about everything and nothing. Her love for Toni Morrison, his secret obsession with old jazz records, the way Chicago winters made you question your life choices. When their hands brushed reaching for the sugar, James felt a spark, like a circuit coming to life. Maya didn't pull away, and the air between them hummed with possibility. That morning stretched into a walk through Millennium Park, their breath visible in the chilly air. The Bean loomed ahead, its mirrored surface reflecting the city's skyline and their own figures, side by side. Maya nudged him, pointing at their distorted reflection. "Look at us," she said, laughing. "Like we belong in some funhouse mirror." "Maybe we do," he said, his voice softer than he'd meant. "You make this city feel different." She glanced at him, her expression unreadable for a moment. "Careful, James. You keep talking like that. I might think you're serious." "I am," he said, holding her gaze. "Dead serious." She didn't respond, but her smile was enough. They kept walking, their shoulders brushing, and James felt something settle in his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the coffee. Their dates became a rhythm, each one pulling James deeper into Maya's world. One night she took him to a jazz club in Wicker Park, a dimly lit spot where the saxophone wailed and the crowd swayed like they were part of the music. Maya knew the bartender, a grizzled guy named Reggie, who slid her a whiskey sour with a wink. "Who's the suit?" Reggie asked, eyeing James. "James," Maya said, her tone playful. "He's learning to keep up." James raised his glass. "Doing my best, Reggie." The music wrapped around them, and when Maya pulled him onto the dance floor, he didn't resist. She moved like she was born to it, her hips swaying, her laughter rising over the notes. James, who hadn't danced since a stiff waltz at a charity ball, felt clumsy but alive. Her hands guided his, and when she leaned in close, her breath warm against his ear, he forgot the world outside. "You're not half bad," she whispered, her lips brushing his cheek. "You're making me look good," he said, his voice low, his hands settling on her waist. That night, walking her home through the bustling streets, James felt like he was waking up from a long sleep. Maya's hand was warm in his, her fingers laced through his like they belonged there. At her apartment door, she turned to him, her eyes searching his. "You're sticking around, huh?" she said, half teasing, half serious. "Long as you'll let me," he replied, meaning every word. She kissed him then, quick and soft, a promise of more to come. "Good night, James," she said, slipping inside, leaving him grinning like a fool on her stoop. But it wasn't just the dates that drew them closer. Maya's world was opening James's eyes, and he was starting to see Chicago, and himself, differently. One Sunday, she invited him to dinner at her family's home in Englewood, a modest brick house with a sagging porch and a front yard bursting with marigolds. James, who'd grown up in a mansion where meals were silent affairs, wasn't prepared for the chaos of the Thompson household. Maya's sister Lila, a nurse with a quick laugh and a sharper tongue, greeted him at the door. "Well, look at you," she said, hands on her hips. "Mr. Penthouse, slumming it in Englewood. You ever had collard greens? Or is this your first rodeo?" James laughed, liking her instantly. "First rodeo, but I'm a quick learner." "Better be," Lila said, leading him inside. "Maya's picky." The dining room was packed. Maya's mom, Diane, a retired schoolteacher with a warm smile and a no-nonsense vibe. Her dad, Clarence, a quiet mechanic who eyed James like he was sizing up a used car, and a rotating cast of cousins and neighbors. The table groaned under plates of fried catfish, cornbread, and greens, the air thick with the smell of butter and spices. James felt out of place at first, his tailored blazer stark against the worn tablecloth, but Maya's hand on his arm grounded him, and when Diane passed him a plate saying, "Eat up, honey, you're too skinny," he relaxed. The conversation was loud, overlapping, full of stories and teasing. Lila grilled him about his job. "So you make apps or something? What's that even mean?" While Clarence asked about his politics, his questions sharp but fair. Maya watched it all with a smile, her eyes flicking to James like she was waiting to see if he'd bolt. But he didn't. He laughed at Lila's jokes, answered Clarence's questions, and even tried the greens, earning a nod from Diane. When Maya's hand found his under the table, her fingers squeezing gently, he knew he'd passed some kind of test. You held your own, she said later, as they washed dishes in the cramped kitchen. The sink was piled high, and Maya's sleeves were rolled up, soap bubbles clinging to her arms. Didn't have a choice, he said, drying a plate. Your family's intense, she laughed, flicking suds at him. You ain't seen nothing yet. He caught her wrist, pulling her close, and for a moment they stood there, the hum of the house around them. Her eyes were soft, and when he leaned in to kiss her, it was slow, deliberate, like he was memorizing her. I'm not going anywhere, he murmured against her lips. Good, she said, her voice barely a whisper, 'cause I'm starting to like having you around. The real turning point came a week later, at Maya's apartment. It was a small one-bedroom in Bronzeville, cluttered with books, plants, and colorful throw pillows that screamed her personality. She'd invited him over after a long day, promising takeout and a movie. When he arrived, she was in leggings and an oversized sweatshirt, her curls piled into a messy bun. She looked so different from the poised woman at the summit, but just as beautiful, maybe more. They ordered pizza, deep dish, because this is Chicago, James, none of that thin crust nonsense, and settled on her couch with a bottle of cheap red wine. The TV played an old Aretha Franklin concert, the Queen of Soul's voice filling the room. Maya sang along softly, her head resting on his shoulder, and James felt a peace he hadn't known was possible. Woo with me, she said suddenly, standing and pulling him up. Here? He said, glancing at the tiny living room. There's barely space. Since when do you need space to feel something? She shot back, her smile daring him. He couldn't say no. She slipped into his arms, her body warm against his, and they swayed to Aretha's voice, the music wrapping them in a cocoon. Her hand slid up his chest, her fingers curling into his shirt, and he felt his pulse quicken. She smelled like vanilla and something earthy, and when she looked up, her eyes were a storm of want and trust. James, she whispered, her lips inches from his. He didn't wait. He kissed her, deep and slow, pouring everything into it, every doubt, every hope, every piece of himself he'd kept locked away. Her hands moved to his neck, pulling him closer, and he felt her sigh against his mouth. His fingers traced the curve of her back, slipping under the hem of her sweatshirt to find the soft warmth of her skin. She shivered, pressing herself against him, and the world narrowed to the heat between them. They stumbled to the couch, laughter breaking the kiss as they nearly tripped over a stack of books. She straddled his lap, her hands framing his face, and kissed him again, this time with a hunger that made his head spin. His hands roamed her hips, her thighs, and when she arched into him, he groaned, the sound raw and unguarded. Maya, he said, his voice rough. You're killing me. Good, she murmured, her lips brushing his ear. I want you to feel this. But then she paused, her hands stilling on his chest. Her eyes searched his, and he saw a flicker of vulnerability. This is real for me, James, she said softly. I need to know it's real for you too. He cupped her face, his thumb brushing her cheek. It's real, he said, his voice steady. You're the realest thing I've ever known. She smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek, and kissed him again, softer this time, like a seal on a promise. They didn't go further, not that night, but the moment was enough. It was more than enough. As James drove home, the city lights blurring past, he felt like a different man. Maya had cracked something open in him, something he'd buried under years of ambition and armor. But with that came a nagging doubt. Her world, vibrant, messy, full of heart, was pulling him in, but his world was still there, all glass and steel and expectations. He'd met her family, danced in her living room, but what happened when she stepped into his life? His mother, Eleanor, had already raised an eyebrow when he'd mentioned Maya, her voice cool. "She sounds interesting, dear." His business partner, Richard Hayes, had made a snide comment about slumming it when James skipped a golf game for dinner at Maya's. And Maya, she was fearless, but he'd seen the way she braced herself when they walked together, the way her smile tightened at a stranger's stare. She was a black woman in a city that didn't always make space for her, and he was a white guy who'd never had to think about it. Could he be what she needed? Could he stand up to the whispers, the judgments, the weight of their differences? He didn't have answers, but as he parked his car and stared up at his penthouse, he knew one thing. Maya Thompson was worth finding out. The Chicago skyline glittered like a promise, but for James Carter, the view from his penthouse felt hollow. It had been 3 weeks since that night in Maya Thompson's apartment, when they danced and kissed and teetered on the edge of something deeper. Those weeks had been a whirlwind, late-night talks, stolen kisses, moments that made him feel like he was finally living. But now, as he stood by his window, a glass of bourbon in hand, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting. The warmth of Maya's world was starting to clash with the cold edges of his, and the cracks were beginning to show. It started at a charity gala in the Gold Coast, one of those black-tie affairs where the champagne flowed and the air was thick with self-importance. James had convinced Maya to come, promising it would be a quick appearance. "Just one night in my world," he'd said, his voice coaxing. "I want them to see you with me." Maya had hesitated, her eyes narrowing. "Your world, huh? You sure they're ready for me?" "They'd be lucky to know you," he'd said, meaning it. But deep down, he knew it wouldn't be that simple. The ballroom at the Drake Hotel was a sea of tuxedos and sequined gowns, chandeliers casting golden light over tables set with crystal. Maya walked in on James's arm, her head high, her deep green dress hugging her curves like a second skin. She was stunning. Her curls swept into an elegant updo, but it was her presence that turned heads, the way she moved like she belonged, even when every eye in the room seemed to weigh her. James felt a surge of pride, but it was short-lived. As they made their rounds, he noticed the whispers, the sidelong glances. A few of his colleagues offered polite smiles, but others weren't so subtle. Richard Hayes, his business partner at Carter Tech, was the worst, a stocky man with a permanent smirk. Richard had a knack for saying the wrong thing and calling it charm. When James introduced Maya, Richard's eyes lingered too long, his handshake too firm. "Maya Thompson," he said, drawing out her name. "You're the one keeping our boy James out of the office. What's your deal? Some kind of community organizer?" Maya's smile didn't waver, but her eyes were steel. "I work in education," she said evenly, "helping kids who don't get the chances your clients' kids do." Richard chuckled, a sound that grated on James's nerves. "Well, aren't you a saint? Guess every billionaire needs a cause these days." James's jaw tightened. "That's enough, Richard." But Richard wasn't done. Later, as James stepped away to grab drinks, he overheard Richard at the bar, his voice carrying over the clink of glasses. "Carter's slumming it with that girl from the South Side," he said to another exec. "What's next? He's gonna move to the projects?" James was back in a heartbeat, his hand on Richard's shoulder, his voice low and dangerous. "Say that again, Richard." "I dare you." The room seemed to hush, eyes turning their way. Richard raised his hands, smirking. "Easy, partner. Just making conversation." Maya, standing a few feet away, had heard it all. Her face was calm, but her eyes burned. When James reached for her, she stepped back, her voice quiet but firm. "Don't, James. Not here." Outside, in the cool night air, she let him have it. They stood by the hotel's valet stand, the city's hum a backdrop to her anger. "This is what I deal with, James," she said, her arms crossed. "Every day. People like him, looking at me like I'm some charity case or a gold digger. You can't just punch it away." "I'm not trying to," he said, his voice raw. "I'm trying to protect you." "Protect me?" She laughed, sharp and bitter. "I've been protecting myself my whole life. I don't need you to play hero. I need you to get it." He reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "I'm trying, Maya. I swear I am." "Try harder," she said, her eyes glistening. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the pavement, leaving him standing there, helpless. The gala was just the start. The next morning, James woke to a notification on his phone. A gossip column in the Chicago Sun-Times, complete with a grainy photo of him and Maya at the event. The headline was innocuous: "Tech Titan's New Flame." But the article was anything but. It dug into Maya's past, painting her as a scrappy Southside activist who'd caught the eye of Chicago's most eligible bachelor. It mentioned her childhood in Englewood, her mother's struggles, even her student loans, as if they were proof she didn't belong in James's world. The comments online were worse, a cesspool of speculation about her motives, her agenda, her race. James was furious, ready to call his lawyers, but when he showed Maya the article, she just sighed. They were at her apartment, the morning light filtering through her curtains, coffee mugs untouched on the table. "This is your world, James," she said, her voice tired. "They don't just see me as your girlfriend. They see me as a story, a headline, and I'm not sure I can live like that." "It's just noise," he said, leaning across the table. "We can ignore it." "Ignore it?" She shook her head, her curls bouncing. "You can ignore it because it's not about you. It's about me, my life, my family, everything I fought for. They're tearing it apart to sell papers." He reached for her hand, and this time she let him, but her fingers were stiff. "I'll fix this," he said. "I'll make it right." "You can't fix everything with money, James," she said softly. "Some things you just have to live through." The weight of her words settled between them, and for the first time, James felt the gap between their worlds. He'd thought love could bridge it, but now he wasn't so sure. The tension didn't stop there. A few days later, James's mother, Eleanor, invited him to dinner at her Lakeshore Drive condo. Eleanor Carter was a force, elegant, sharp, and fiercely protective of her son's legacy. She'd met Maya briefly at the gala, her smile polite, but her eyes cold. Over a meal of seared scallops and Sauvignon Blanc, she didn't waste time. "She's lovely, James," Eleanor said, her voice smooth as silk. "But she's different, from a different world. Have you thought about what this means for you? For the company?" James's fork paused midair. "What's that supposed to mean?" Eleanor sighed, setting down her wine glass. "You're not a child, darling. You know how these things work. People talk, investors, board members. They notice who you're with. And this girl, with her background, she's not exactly—" "Stop," James said, his voice hard. "Her name is Maya, and she's more than her background. She's smarter than half the people in your social club, and she's doing work that actually matters." Eleanor raised an eyebrow, unruffled. "I'm not saying she's not impressive. I'm saying she's a complication. You need someone who fits, James. Someone like Vanessa was." The mention of his ex stung, and James pushed back from the table. "Vanessa cared about my last name, not me. Maya's the opposite, and if you can't see that, you don't know me at all." He left the condo in a storm, but Eleanor's words lingered, planting a seed of doubt. Was he naive to think he and Maya could make this work? Was he asking too much of her, pulling her into a world that judged her before she even opened her mouth? Maya, meanwhile, was fighting her own battles. Her work at the education nonprofit was her lifeblood, but the media attention was starting to bleed into it. Donors asked pointed questions about her relationship with Carter Tech, implying she was using James for funding. A colleague, well-meaning but clueless, suggested she tone down her activism to avoid scaring off sponsors. Even her sister, Lila, who'd warmed to James, noticed the strain. "You okay, sis?" Lila asked one night, as they sat on Maya's couch with a pint of ice cream. "You've been quiet lately." "And not your usual, I'm thinking deep thoughts quiet." Maya sighed, digging her spoon into the rocky road. "It's James. Or, not him exactly. It's everything around him. The looks, the articles, the way people act like I'm some kind of trophy or threat. I'm starting to wonder if I can handle it." Lila frowned, setting the ice cream down. "You love him, don't you?" Maya's throat tightened. She hadn't said the word out loud, but it was there, heavy and undeniable. "Yeah," she admitted. "But love doesn't fix everything. What if I lose myself trying to fit into his life?" Lila reached for her hand. "Then don't fit. Be you. If he's worth it, he'll meet you where you are." The words were a lifeline, but they didn't erase the fear. Maya had spent her life carving out a place in a world that often tried to push her out. She'd fought for her education, her career, her voice. Could she keep fighting for James, too? The breaking point came at a community event Maya organized in Bronzeville, a fundraiser for her students. James was there, helping set up tables, his sleeves rolled up, a far cry from the polished CEO. He'd started spending more time with her kids, especially Jamal, a sharp 16-year-old who dreamed of college but couldn't afford it. James had promised to help with Jamal's applications, and seeing him with the teen, patient, engaged, made Maya's heart ache in the best way. But that night, as they cleaned up after the event, Maya overheard a conversation that shattered her. James was on the phone outside, his voice low but clear. "I know, Mom," he was saying. "I hear you. I need to figure out if this is worth the complications." The word hit Maya like a slap. Complications. Was that what she was to him? A problem to be solved? She waited until he hung up, then confronted him in the empty community center, the fluorescent lights harsh overhead. "Complications, James?" she said, her voice trembling. "Is that what I am to you?" His eyes widened, panic flashing across his face. "Maya, no. That's not what I meant." "Then what?" She cut in, her arms crossed. "Because I heard you. Talking to your mom, weighing me like I'm some business deal. I'm not a deal, James. I'm a person." "I know that," he said, stepping closer. "I was talking about the noise, the articles, the gossip, all of it. Not you. Never you." But the damage was done. Maya's eyes filled with tears, and she hated herself for it. "I can't keep doing this," she said, her voice breaking. "I can't keep wondering if I'm enough for your world. I'm tired, James. I'm so tired." He reached for her, but she stepped back, shaking her head. "I need space," she said. "I need to figure out what I can live with." She walked away, leaving him standing in the empty room, the echo of her words louder than the city outside. James drove home in a daze, the streets blurring past. His penthouse, once a sanctuary, felt like a cage. He poured another bourbon, but it didn't help. Maya's face, hurt, angry, vulnerable, haunted him. He'd thought he was doing enough, showing up, trying to understand her world, but maybe he'd been wrong. Maybe love wasn't enough when the world kept pulling them apart. He wanted to fight for her. But how? How do you fight something as big as a city's whispers, a mother's doubts, a history neither of them could erase? For the first time in his life, James Carter, the man who'd built an empire from nothing, felt powerless. And it terrified him. The air in Chicago was heavy with the promise of rain, the kind of late fall day where the city felt like it was holding its breath. James Carter stood outside Maya Thompson's community center in Bronzeville, his hands stuffed in his coat pockets, his heart a tangled mess. It had been a week since their fight, since Maya had walked away, asking for space. A week of sleepless nights, of replaying her words, "I'm tired, James," and wondering if he'd lost her for good. But he wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. He'd called her, texted her, left voicemails that went unanswered. Finally, yesterday, she'd sent a single message. "Fundraiser at the center tomorrow, 6 p.m. Come if you want." It wasn't much, but it was an opening, and James was clinging to it like a lifeline. He didn't know what to expect, but he knew one thing. He had to show up. For her. For them. The community center was a low brick building, its walls covered in murals of jazz legends and civil rights heroes. Inside, the gym was transformed. String lights crisscrossed the ceiling. Folding tables groaned under trays of fried chicken and sweet potato pie, and a DJ spun Motown classics. The room buzzed with energy, packed with families, kids darting between adults, and volunteers in matching t-shirts. At the center of it all was Maya, radiant in a mustard-yellow dress that caught the light, her curls bouncing as she moved from table to table, hugging people, laughing, directing traffic like a conductor. James watched her from the doorway, his chest tight. She was in her element, every gesture full of purpose, every smile genuine. He'd seen her in his world, stiff galas, polished restaurants, but this was different. This was home. And for the first time, he felt like an outsider, not because of the crowd, but because he wasn't sure he deserved to be here. "Yo, you just gonna stand there, or you gonna help?" The voice snapped him out of his thoughts. Leela, Maya's sister, stood nearby, balancing a stack of paper plates. Her eyes were sharp, but her grin was playful. "We got tables to set up, rich guy." James smiled, grateful for the distraction. "Put me to work." Lila handed him a pile of napkins and pointed to a row of tables. "Don't mess it up. Maya's picky about her setup." He got to it, folding napkins, arranging chairs, even hauling a cooler of ice when a volunteer called for help. The work was grounding, a far cry from boardroom deals or cocktail hours. People noticed him. Some gave curious looks, others nodded like he was just another helper, but no one treated him like James Carter, billionaire. It was freeing, and for a moment, he could almost forget the fight, the articles, the weight of their differences. Maya spotted him halfway through the evening, her eyes widening briefly before softening. She walked over, a tray of cupcakes in her hands. "Didn't expect to see you hauling ice," she said, her tone light but guarded. "Didn't expect to be any good at it," he shot back, wiping sweat from his brow. "You gonna put me on the payroll?" She laughed, and the sound was a balm to his nerves. "We'll see how you do with the cleanup. That's the real test." They fell into an easy rhythm, working side by side, stealing glances when they thought the other wasn't looking. The fundraiser was a success. Hundreds of dollars raised for scholarships, kids beaming as they showed off their artwork, families dancing to Stevie Wonder. James watched Maya give a speech, her voice steady and fierce, promising every kid in the room a chance at their dreams. He clapped louder than anyone, his heart swelling with pride. After the crowd thinned, James stayed to help clean up. The gym was quiet now, just a few volunteers stacking chairs, the DJ packing up. Maya was sweeping the floor, her dress swapped for a t-shirt and jeans, her face tired but content. James grabbed a broom, joining her, the silence between them comfortable but charged. "You didn't have to stay," she said, not looking up. "Wanted to," he said, his voice soft. "This matters to you. So it matters to me." She paused, leaning on her broom, her eyes searching his. "James, I'm still figuring this out. Us. It's not just about you and me. It's everything else." "I know," he said, stepping closer. "But I'm here, Maya. I'm trying. She nodded, her expression unreadable, and went back to sweeping. But when their hands brushed passing a trash bag, she didn't pull away. It was small, but it was enough. They ended up in the center's tiny kitchen, washing dishes under a flickering bulb. The sink was cramped, their elbows bumping as they worked. Maya flicked soap suds at him and he retaliated, earning a laugh that lit up the room. For a moment it was just them. No headlines, no galas, no complications. "Tell me something real," she said suddenly, drying her hands on a towel. "Something you don't tell anyone." He hesitated, the question catching him off guard. The kitchen was quiet, the hum of the city faint through the walls. "When I was a kid," he started, his voice low, "I used to hide in my dad's study, reading his old jazz magazines. He never knew. It was the only place I felt like me. Not the Carter heir, not the future CEO, just me." Maya's eyes softened, and she stepped closer, her hand resting on his arm. "That's why you love that jazz club," she said, piecing it together. "It's not just music. It's home." He nodded, his throat tight. "Yeah. And you feel like that too. Like home." Her breath caught, and for a moment, they just stood there, the air thick with unspoken words. Then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "My mom used to sing me to sleep when I was little. Old hymns mostly. But when things got bad, when the bills piled up or the landlord was knocking, she'd sing, 'Ain't no mountain high enough.' Said it was her way of telling me we'd make it, no matter what." James reached for her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. "You're still making it," he said. "Every day." She looked up, tears shimmering in her eyes. "It's hard, James. Harder than I let on. Growing up where I did. Fighting for every inch. It's in my bones. And being with you, it's like I'm fighting all over again." "Then let me fight with you," he said, his voice fierce. "I'm not perfect, Maya. I'm gonna mess up, say the wrong thing, miss the mark. But I'm all in." She didn't respond with words. Instead, she stepped into his arms, her head resting against his chest. He held her tight, feeling the steady beat of her heart, the warmth of her against him. The kitchen faded, and it was just them, two people trying to hold on to something real. The moment deepened when they moved to the gym, the last volunteers gone, the lights dim. Maya plugged her phone into a speaker, and Aretha Franklin's voice filled the space, soft and soulful. "Dance with me," she said, echoing that night in her apartment. He didn't hesitate. They swayed in the empty gym, her body pressed against his, her hands sliding up his back. His fingers traced the curve of her spine, and when she tilted her face up, he kissed her, slow, deliberate, like he was pouring his soul into it. Her lips parted, and the kiss grew hungrier, her hands gripping his shirt, his palms cupping her face. They stumbled against a table, laughing softly, and when he kissed her neck, she sighed, her fingers tangling in his hair. "James," she murmured, her voice a mix of want and warning. He pulled back, his forehead resting against hers, their breaths mingling. "I know," he said, his voice rough. "Slow. We go slow." She nodded, her eyes bright with something he couldn't name. Trust, maybe, or hope. They stayed like that, wrapped in each other, the music a heartbeat around them. It wasn't just a dance. It was a promise, a step toward something neither of them could fully see, but both wanted to chase. The next morning, James woke with a lightness he hadn't felt in weeks. The fundraiser, the dance, Maya's arms around him. It was a turning point, a moment that said they could make this work. He threw himself into her world, showing up at the center to help with paperwork, meeting Jamal, the teenager Maya was mentoring. Jamal was whip-smart, with a quick wit and a chip on his shoulder, but he warmed to James when they started talking about college essays. "You really think I can get into Northwestern?" Jamal asked, his voice skeptical as they sat in the center's library. "I know you can," James said, handing him a stack of sample essays. "You've got the brains, just need to show 'em who you are." Jamal grinned, and James felt a pang of pride. This was Maya's world, changing lives, one kid at a time, and he was starting to understand why it mattered so much to her. He and Maya grew closer too. They spent evenings cooking in her apartment, her teaching him how to make her mom's cornbread, him burning it and laughing when she teased him. They walked the lakefront, her hand in his, talking about dreams they'd never shared with anyone else. He told her about wanting to travel, not in private jets, but in a beat-up van, seeing the world on his own terms. She told him about her dream of opening a school, a place where every kid felt seen. But even as they built something beautiful, the outside world kept pressing in. James's mother, Eleanor, called, her voice clipped. "I hear you're spending a lot of time in Bronzeville," she said. "Be careful, James. You have a reputation to protect." He brushed it off, but the words lingered. And then there was Richard Hayes, who cornered him at the office, his tone smug. "You're getting soft, Carter. All this do-gooder stuff. It's not you. That girl's got you wrapped around her finger. She's got a name," James snapped, "and she's worth more than you'll ever understand." Richard just laughed, and James walked away, his fists clenched. He didn't tell Maya about it, not wanting to burden her, but the pressure was building, and he could feel it. The breaking point came a week later, at the community center. James was there, helping Maya sort donations, when his phone rang. It was Eleanor, and he stepped outside to take the call, not wanting Maya to overhear. The conversation was tense, Eleanor pushing him to attend a high-profile investor dinner, hinting that Maya was a distraction. "I'm not bailing on her, Mom," he said, his voice low. "But I hear you. I need to figure out if this is worth the complications." He didn't see Maya behind him, didn't know she'd followed him out to grab a box from her car. But she heard every word, and when he turned, her face stopped him cold. Her eyes were wide, hurt, her arms crossed like a shield. "Complications?" she said, her voice trembling. "Is that what I am to you, James?" "Maya, no," he said, panic rising. "That's not what I meant." "Then what?" she cut in, stepping closer, her voice rising. "Because I heard you, talking to your mom like I'm some problem you need to solve. I'm not a problem, James. I'm a person, with a life, a family, a purpose, and I'm done feeling like I have to prove I'm enough." "I wasn't talking about you," he said, desperate. "I was talking about the noise, the articles, the gossip, the way people look at us. I'm trying to protect what we have." "Protect it?" She laughed, sharp and raw. "You don't get it, do you? I've been protecting myself my whole life. I don't need you to do it for me. I need you to stand with me, not weigh me like some business deal." "Maya, please," he said, reaching for her, but she stepped back, tears streaming down her face. "I can't do this right now," she said, her voice breaking. "I need time, James. I need to know if I can keep doing this without losing myself." She turned and walked back inside, leaving him standing in the parking lot, the weight of her words crushing him. He'd thought they were building something unbreakable, but now, as the first drops of rain hit the asphalt, he wasn't sure. All he knew was that he couldn't lose her. Not like this. The rain came down in sheets, turning Chicago streets into rivers of gray. James Carter stood in Grant Park, soaked to the bone, his coat heavy with water. Across from him, Maya Thompson's eyes were red, her curls plastered to her face, her voice barely audible over the storm. "I can't keep doing this, James," she said, her words cutting deeper than the cold. "I need to know if I can stand on my own, without your world pulling me apart." James's heart pounded, a desperate rhythm against the rain. "Maya, please," he said, stepping closer, his hands reaching for hers. "We can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes." But she shook her head, tears mixing with the rain on her cheeks. "It's not about you fixing it," she said, her voice breaking. "It's about me figuring out who I am when I'm with you. And right now, I don't know." She turned, her figure blurring in the downpour, and walked away. James stood frozen, watching her go, the weight of her absence heavier than the storm. For the first time in his life, he felt truly lost, not in a boardroom or a deal, but in the one thing that mattered most. The fight at the community center had been a wound, but this was a fracture. It started a week after Maya asked for time, when James showed up at her apartment hoping to talk. She'd let him in, but the air between them was heavy, her eyes guarded. They sat on her couch, the same one where they'd laughed and kissed, but now it felt like a battleground. "I meant what I said, James," she started, her voice steady but tired. "I need space. Not because I don't care, but because I care too much. Being with you, it's like I'm fighting two wars, one to keep my head up in your world, and one to hold on to who I am." "I don't want you to fight," he said, his voice raw. "I want you to be you. The Maya who lights up a room, who fights for her kids, who makes me feel like I'm enough." She smiled, but it was sad, fleeting. "That's the thing, James. I don't know if I can be that Maya when I'm with you. Not right now. The articles, the looks, your mom's voice in my head. It's too much." He leaned forward, his hands clasped tight. "Let me deal with that. The press, my mom, all of it. I'll shut it down." "You can't shut down the world," she said softly. "And I can't keep pretending I fit in yours. I'm not built for galas and gossip columns. I'm built for this." She gestured around her apartment, at the stacks of books, the photos of her students, the life she'd carved out. "And I need to know if I can keep it, even if I love you." The word love hung between them, heavy and unspoken until now. James's breath caught, hope flaring despite the ache in his chest. "You love me," he said, almost a question. She nodded, tears welling. "Yeah, but love doesn't fix everything. Sometimes it just makes it harder." He reached for her hand, and she let him hold it, her fingers trembling. "Then let's make it work," he said, his voice fierce. "We're stronger than this, Maya, together." But she pulled her hand away, her eyes distant. "I got an offer," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "A project in Mississippi, working with schools in rural areas. It's a chance to do something big, something real. And I think I need to take it." James felt the ground shift beneath him. "Mississippi," he said, his voice hollow. "For how long?" 6 months, she said. "Maybe more. I leave next week." The words were a punch, stealing his breath. "You're running," he said, anger creeping into his voice. "You're scared, so you're running." Her eyes flashed and she stood, her arms crossed. "I'm not running. I'm choosing myself, James. Something I've had to do my whole life. You wouldn't understand." "Then help me understand," he said, standing too, his voice rising. "Don't just walk away like this is nothing." "It's not nothing," she shouted, tears spilling over. "It's everything. That's why it hurts so damn much." The room fell silent, the only sound the faint hum of the city outside. Maya wiped her eyes, her shoulders slumping. "I need this, James," she said, softer now. "I need to know I'm enough without you. And you need to figure out if I'm worth the fight." He wanted to argue, to beg, to pull her into his arms and make her stay. But her eyes, fierce, vulnerable, resolute, stopped him. She wasn't asking for permission. She was telling him. And as much as it killed him, he knew he had to let her go. The day she left, James couldn't stay away. He found her at Grant Park, where she'd asked to meet, the sky dark with storm clouds. She stood under a tree, her duffel bag at her feet, her face a mix of determination and pain. The rain started as they talked, soaking them both, but neither moved. "I don't want this," he said, his voice raw. "I don't want you to go." "I know," she said, her voice breaking. "But I have to. For me." He stepped closer, rain dripping from his hair, his hands clenched. "What about us? What about everything we've built?" She reached out, her fingers brushing his cheek, and he leaned into her touch, desperate for it. "If it's real," she said, her voice trembling, "it'll still be here when I get back. But I need to do this, James. I need to know I'm not just your complication." The words stung, a callback to their fight, and he flinched. "You're not," he said, his voice fierce. "You're everything." She smiled, tears streaming down her face, and kissed him. One last aching kiss, her lips warm against the cold rain. Then she pulled away, picked up her bag, and walked toward the waiting cab. James stood there, the storm swallowing her figure, his heart splintering with every step she took. The weeks that followed were the darkest James had ever known. His penthouse, once a symbol of success, felt like a tomb. He moved through his days like a ghost. Meetings, emails, decisions that used to matter, but now felt meaningless. The city, with its lights and noise, was a constant reminder of Maya. Every jazz club, every soul food joint, every street corner held her shadow. He tried to fill the void. He threw himself into work, but the numbers on his screen blurred. He went to the gym, ran until his lungs burned, but it didn't quiet the ache. He even called his mother, hoping for some kind of anchor, but Eleanor's voice was cool, dismissive. "Perhaps it's for the best," she said. "You need someone who fits, James." The words ignited a fury in him, and he hung up, pacing his apartment like a caged animal. Maya didn't need to fit. She was the one who'd shown him what life could be, messy, real, worth fighting for. And he'd let her walk away, but not everyone was ready to let him wallow. One evening, Lila showed up at his office, her nurse's scrubs wrinkled from a long shift. She didn't bother with pleasantries, leaning against his desk with a no-nonsense stare. "You look like hell," she said, tossing a bag of takeout ribs on his desk. "Eat something, then talk." James managed a weak smile, opening the bag. The smell of barbecue filled the room, a painful reminder of Maya. "I messed up, Lila," he said, his voice low. "I thought I was doing enough, but I wasn't." Lila nodded, her eyes softening. "You hurt her, James. Not just with that complications crap, but by not getting it. She's been fighting her whole life, against people like your buddy Richard, against a world that tells her she's less. And being with you, that's a whole new fight." "I know," he said, his throat tight. "I see it now. But she's gone, Lila. What am I supposed to do?" Lila leaned forward, her voice firm. "You fight for her, dummy. Not with flowers or fancy dinners, but by showing up. She's in Mississippi, not Mars. If you love her, don't just sit here feeling sorry for yourself. Prove it." The words hit like a spark in the dark. James looked at her, the fog in his mind clearing. "You think she'd even want to see me?" Lila shrugged, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Only one way to find out." Maya in Mississippi was fighting her own battles. The project, a literacy program for rural schools, was everything she'd dreamed of. Kids eager to learn, teachers grateful for support, a chance to make a difference. But every night, in the small rented room she called home. Her thoughts drifted to James. His laugh, his hands, the way he'd looked at her like she was the only thing that mattered. She missed him, more than she'd expected, but the ache was tangled with fear. Could she go back to Chicago, to his world, without losing herself? She threw herself into work, spending long hours with her students, but the quiet moments betrayed her. One night, flipping through photos on her phone, she lingered on a picture of her and James at the jazz club, his arm around her, both of them laughing. A tear slipped down her cheek, and she whispered to the empty room, "What am I doing?" Her colleague, a kind older woman named Ruth, noticed the change. Over coffee one morning, Ruth asked, "You left someone behind, didn't you?" Maya nodded, her throat tight. "I thought I needed to prove I could do this alone. But now, I don't know." Ruth smiled, patting her hand. "Love's not about proving you're enough on your own. It's about finding someone who makes you stronger together. Question is he that someone?" Maya didn't answer, but the question stayed with her, a seed planted in the cracks of her resolve. James, back in Chicago, was starting to find his way. Inspired by Lila, he returned to the community center, helping with after-school programs, mentoring Jamal. The kid was a lifeline, his sarcasm and ambition a reminder of Maya's passion. One afternoon, as they worked on Jamal's college essay, the teen looked up, his eyes serious. "You miss Ms. Thompson, don't you?" James nodded, surprised by the question. "Every day." "Then why you still here?" Jamal said, leaning back. "Go get her, man. She's worth it." The simplicity of it, the faith in Jamal's voice, crystallized something in James. He'd been waiting for a sign, but maybe this was it. Maya was worth fighting for, not with words or promises, but with action. He booked a flight to Mississippi that night, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and hope. As he packed a bag, the city outside his window felt different, not a cage, but a challenge. He didn't know if Maya would take him back, didn't know if he could bridge the gap between their worlds, but he knew one thing. He had to try, for her, for them. The Mississippi sun was relentless, baking the cracked asphalt outside the small school where Maya Thompson worked. James Carter stood by his rental car, his shirt clinging to his back, his heart hammering as he watched the building's front door. It had been 2 months since Maya left Chicago, 2 months since that rain-soaked goodbye in Grant Park. He'd flown to Mississippi on a leap of faith, driven by Lila's words and Jamal's blunt advice. "Go get her, man. She's worth it." But now, standing here, doubt gnawed at him. What if she'd moved on? What if he was too late? The school was a squat cinder-block structure, its playground littered with faded equipment. Through the window he saw Maya, her curls tied back, leaning over a desk to help a student. She was smiling, her face lit with the same passion he'd fallen for, and his chest ached. She was still Maya, fierce, radiant, unstoppable, but would she still want him? He took a breath, squared his shoulders, and walked inside. The hallway smelled of chalk dust and disinfectant, the hum of air conditioning barely cutting the heat. A teacher pointed him to Maya's classroom, and when he knocked, the door swung open, revealing her in a bright blue dress, a stack of papers in her hands. Her eyes widened, the papers slipping slightly. "James?" she said, her voice a mix of shock and something softer, something that gave him hope. "Hey," he said, his throat tight. "Can we talk?" She hesitated, then nodded, leading him to a quiet corner of the school's library. The room was small, lined with worn books and posters of smiling animals urging kids to read. Maya crossed her arms, her expression guarded, but not cold. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice steady but curious. "I couldn't stay away," he said, stepping closer. "I tried, Maya. I tried to give you space, to let you do this. But I'm miserable without you. I love you, and I'm here to fight for us." Her breath caught, and she looked away, her fingers twisting the hem of her dress. "James, it's not that simple. I needed this, needed to know I could stand on my own, and I'm doing good work here. Real work." "I know," he said, his voice raw. "I see it. You're incredible. But you don't have to do it alone. I don't want you to change for me, Maya. I want to change for you, to be the man you deserve." Her eyes met his, shimmering with unshed tears. "You hurt me," she said, her voice trembling. "Not just with what you said, but by not getting it. My world's not easy. It's not galas and penthouses. It's fighting every day to be seen, to be enough." "I get that now," he said, his hands clenching to keep from reaching for her. "Or I'm trying to. I've been at the center, working with Jamal, learning from your kids. I've seen what you fight for, and I want to fight with you. Not to fix it, but to stand by you." She studied him, her gaze piercing, searching for truth. Then slowly she stepped closer, her hand resting on his arm. "You came all the way to Mississippi," she said, a small smile breaking through. "That's got to count for something." He laughed, relief flooding him. "It's a start, right?" She nodded, her smile widening, and when she hugged him, her arms tight around his neck, he felt the world right itself. Her warmth, her scent, vanilla and earth, grounded him, and he held her like she might vanish again. "I missed you," he whispered into her hair. "I missed you too," she said, her voice muffled against his chest. "But we've got work to do, James. This isn't a fairy tale." "I know," he said, pulling back to look at her. "I'm ready." James stayed in Mississippi for a week, living in a modest motel and spending every day with Maya. He joined her at the school, helping with reading groups, hauling supplies, even playing basketball with the kids on a cracked court. The students called him Mr. Chicago, teasing him about his accent, and Maya laughed, her eyes bright with something like pride. At night, they sat on her porch, sharing sweet tea and stories, rebuilding what they'd nearly lost. One evening, under a sky streaked with pink, they walked to a nearby creek, the air thick with the hum of cicadas. Maya kicked off her sandals, dipping her toes in the water, and James watched her, his heart full. "You look happy here," he said, sitting beside her. "I am," she said, her voice soft. "This place? It's hard, but it's real. Like Chicago, but quieter. It's given me clarity." "About us?" he asked, his voice tentative. She looked at him, her eyes steady. "About me. I needed to know I could do this without you, that I wasn't just your shadow. But being here, missing you, it showed me I'm stronger with you. Not because I need you, but because I want you." He took her hand, his thumb tracing her knuckles. "I want you too, more than anything, and I'm done letting the world get in our way." She leaned into him, her head on his shoulder, and they sat there, the creek bubbling, the stars emerging. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. Back in Chicago, they faced the world together. Maya returned after her project ended, and James was there at the airport, holding a sign that said, "Welcome home, Ms. Thompson." She laughed, running into his arms, and the kiss they shared was a promise, a vow to keep fighting, but the challenges didn't vanish. The media still whispered, Eleanor still disapproved, and Richard Hayes still smirked. James shut it down where he could, firing Richard from Carter Tech after one too many snide remarks, sitting his mother down for a blunt talk about respect. Eleanor softened, grudgingly, when she saw Maya at a family dinner, her intelligence and warmth undeniable. "She's Formidable, Eleanor admitted, and James took it as a win. Maya, meanwhile, stood taller. She ignored the gossip, focused on her work, and leaned on James when the weight got heavy. They split their time between his penthouse and a cozy house in Bronzeville, a compromise that felt like home. James cooked breakfast, burning the toast, as always, and Maya taught him her mom's cornbread recipe, laughing when he got flour on his face. The final moment came at a community center event, a celebration of the scholarship fund Maya had built. James had planned it for weeks, working with Lila and Jamal to make it perfect. The gym was decked out, fairy lights, soul food catering, a playlist of Maya's favorite songs. Families packed the room, kids running wild, adults dancing to Marvin Gaye. Maya, in a red dress that hugged her curves, was the star, thanking donors, hugging students, her smile brighter than the lights. James watched her, his heart pounding. In his pocket was a ring, not a gaudy diamond, but a simple band with an emerald, the color of her eyes when she laughed. He'd designed it with a local jeweler, inspired by a necklace her grandmother had worn. It was personal, real, like her. As the night wound down, he took the mic, his hands shaking. The room quieted, Maya looking at him with a mix of curiosity and amusement. "This woman," he started, his voice steady despite his nerves, "changed my life. Maya Thompson showed me what it means to live, to fight, to love with everything you've got. She's the strongest person I know, and I'm the luckiest because she chose me." The crowd cheered, Lila whistling, Jamal grinning. Maya's eyes widened, her hand covering her mouth as James walked to her, dropping to one knee. The room erupted, but all he saw was her. "Maya," he said, pulling out the ring, "you're my home, my fire, my everything. I want morning coffee and late-night arguments and growing old with you. Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down her face, her smile radiant. "Yes," she whispered, before he could even finish, and the crowd roared. He slid the ring on her finger, standing to kiss her. A deep, soul-shaking kiss that drowned out the noise. Her arms wrapped around him, her lips warm and sure, and he felt complete. They danced under the fairy lights, her family joining in, Lila teasing, "About time, rich guy." Jamal high-fived James, saying, "You did good, Mr. Chicago." Even Eleanor, there at Maya's insistence, clapped, her eyes misty. Months later, they stood on a Lake Michigan beach at sunset, barefoot, her hand in his. They'd launched a foundation for educational equity, with Maya at the helm, James, her biggest supporter. Their life wasn't perfect. Arguments flared, challenges lingered. But it was theirs, built on love, courage, and the choice to show up every day. As the waves lapped at their feet, Maya leaned into him, her voice soft. "We made it, didn't we?" "Yeah," he said, kissing her forehead. "And we're just getting started." Their story wasn't a fairy tale. It was better, real, messy, unbreakable. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, James knew one thing for sure. With Maya by his side, he'd found the only wealth that mattered. If James and Maya's journey hit you in the heart like it did me, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below. What's your favorite moment from their story? Or tell me about a love that changed your life. Let's keep these stories alive together.